Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Our case tonight centres on the beast of Brigstock and the strange mystery of a missing man who vanished in very unusual circumstances. This case was shared with me by a listener to the show who reached out one evening in April this month, 2025, as he had information on an area I've had a keen eye on for over a decade. As one of the BBR investigators, it's his actual local area. For purposes of anonymity, we will call tonight's witness Thomas. And Thomas said, I watched a recent podcast on big cat sightings in the UK with reference to the Northamptonshire sightings. And the main reason that I feel that I should contact you is because of the presence of a large cat, said to be black in colour, that frequented an area of land east of Corby for around 20 years, from approximately 1995. I'm from this area, but I have to say that I've never witnessed this animal. However, I do know people that did, and at very close quarters. So the incident that happened, and that I'm going to discuss, took place on what was probably the last Saturday in November of 2022. It took place in Springwood, which is about 2 miles from Brigstock, a village about 4 miles southeast from Corby, Northamptonshire. On that day, a local shoot were moving through Springwood on what was their last but one drive of the day. The time was around 2 to 3 p.m, and they'd just finished the drive, and one shot bird hadn't been retrieved. So an individual who was just a beater for the day went back through the wood with his dog to find the bird. This should have taken no more than 10 minutes or so, given that his dog was a trained gun dog. The individual did not return. So he was in his 60s, an experienced shooting man. Why did he not have a gun that day? I don't know. So somebody went to look for him and couldn't find him. And there's a release pen in the wood, and the gate's always closed. When the searcher arrived at the gate, it was open. He entered the pen, searched to no avail, reported back to the other members, and the shoot was terminated. A more extensive search ensued, again drawing a blank. So the police were called. By 6 p.m, they were treating him as missing, and inquiries were being made in the local area. Also, 2 Facebook pages went up on the internet. One by the gentleman's family, asking if anyone knew of his whereabouts, and one by Northamptonshire Police, along the same lines. By 8 p.m, there was a police presence on the outside of the wood, along with the remaining shoot members, whom I believe were told to remain. At no time during the entire night was any attempt by the police made to search for the man. Both the Facebook postings had been removed by 9 p.m. that night. By around 11 a.m. the following day, the Sunday, paramedics were in attendance in the field to the roadside of Springwood. That's the Brigstock to Lower Bennyfield Road. The man was either passed away on site or passed away in hospital. I was told in a cryptic way that he'd been found with some kind of lacerations, and around 3 weeks later, I found large prints outside my mobile home. There had been a period of rainfall, and the track next to my van was like slurry. That night, there was a sharp frost, and when I went out in the morning, the first thing I saw was the prints. They were not there the day before. They were very clear and measured 4.5 inches by 3 inches. I took photographs and I measured them with tape, and you can see that in the photos. I showed them to some interesting parties who said they were dog prints. And the thing is, there are no claw marks showing, as you'd expect from a dog. I measured the distance between 2 of the prints, and the distance was 27 inches. I live in a remote site, which, as the crow flies, is approximately 15 miles from Brigstock, the site of the incident. Now, the incident never made the news, and if the man had suffered a health issue, and died of natural causes or something like that, there would have been some local coverage. If he'd been involved in a shooting accident, it would have been, that would have got coverage as well. No reference to what happened to his dog has ever been made. And it's possible that it went for his dog and he intervened to his cost, or maybe it went for him. To this day, residents in Brigstock know nothing about the events of that night. Whatever happened to this man was shut down and suppressed by the authorities. Thomas added, "We shall now go back to around 1995-96. I was in the Springwood area when I met a lad about 20 years of age. He had his gun with him and was legitimately on the land. We exchanged pleasantries and went on our separate ways. Within 10 minutes or so, he doubled back and walked back in my direction. He was very pale and visibly shaken. He did not have his gun with him. I asked him what happened, and he said that a large black cat-like animal had come out of the hedge less than 10 feet in front of him. He said that it just was there, and he dropped his gun, stunned at what he was looking at. The cat then disappeared back through the hedge. I have never seen him again to question him further." During the following 20 years, there have been many sightings of large cats along the road from Brigstock to Lower Bennyfield. Not long before the man died, there was a sighting of it in Springwood. And once again, it was a close encounter with a big cat from only a few metres away. Pug marks have also been found over the years. Now, I'm not saying that this individual was attacked by a leopard, because I was not there, and nobody has said he was. What I'm saying is that has been a leopard seen in the area for some 20 years or so. At 20 years of age, this animal would probably have been sick, injured, or hungry at the time, which makes it potentially dangerous to anyone and anything that encounters it. The lifespan of these animals can exceed 20 years if conditions are favourable. That's the expert's view, not mine, said Thomas. Wherever the truth is, this incident was suppressed. I do not want to stick my head above the parapet. What it needs is an outsider to look into it, perhaps filing a Freedom of Information request to see what gets flushed out. Now, I contacted our witness via email, arranged a call with Thomas, and that call took place on the 8th of April. We chatted for an hour or so, whilst I was brought up to speed, and Thomas was able to give me more information that will help me try and unravel this strange and quite disturbing case, which I think you will agree deserves a deep dive. Thomas gave me all the information before we spoke, so I was able to let him know about the other reports in the area, all within a short distance of Corby. He was familiar with several of those areas, and he let me know that many of them are owned by the Ministry of Defence. First, I have transcribed our phone conversation, which Thomas is happy for me to share with you. Thomas said, "The reason I wanted to speak to you, Deb, is that I think the information I have is significant, and there are a number of red flags. I also believe we've been lied to by the powers that be for a very long time, and one of those lies is that the countryside is a safe place to be, as at times it is not. When I was younger, I spent time out in the countryside all over the UK, never gave it a second thought. But now, I wouldn't be going out in far-reaching places on my own anymore. I have a really bad feeling about what's going on, and I've reached out to other researchers and investigators with this information, as I feel it's important for the general public to know. There are some very disturbing things happening, and it's being hidden and hushed up, I believe, by the authorities. Each summer, farmers around the area make reports of bright lights seen from above, circling the fields and the woods. And one man's mysterious demise was wiped from the internet within hours. The man went missing in strange circumstances and was found deceased after a couple of days. When I was looking for information on the case, I came across one of your interviews, Deb, with a gentleman called Fred. He saw a werewolf-like creature at his window one night before he passed away. I'm really familiar with the area, and I've passed the farm on occasions in the past. Very close to where he lives is an area called the Warrington Crossroads, and I often refer to this as the Warrington Triangle due to its position. There have been some very strange, unexplained cases to all four directions, and there is a weird private woodland that's posted for army cadets that has several bunkers sitting within it. I believe this is central to the activity happening here, and reports of strange lights in the sky go back to the 1950s. Drivers on the road report their cars just stalling and stopping for no reason whatsoever. Jenny Randalls gave an account from a gentleman who in the early August 1973 was driving his Mini from Northampton at around 1:30 a.m. on the A428. Thomas said, in Jenny Randall's story, he got as far as Little and Great Horton. He remembers looking at the clock tower and on the old church as he passed, and he noted the time as 2 a.m. He was immediately hit with a bright white light, and his next memory is coming to on the bridge at Bromham in Bedford. He saw a man going out to get his morning paper who called the emergency services. The man was taken to hospital for several days until deemed to be okay. One thing to note is that I seem to remember when he was found, he was wet through and there had been no rain that night. Thomas went on to add, one strange aspect is that his car was found by a farmer close to Turvey on the other side of the Warrington Crossroads. The corn in the field was up, and in those days it was a lot taller than, the corn plants you see now. The farmer contacted the police who attended, and everyone was puzzled as to how the car came to be in the field, as there were no indentations of it entering the cornfield. In fact, it looked as if it had been dropped in there from above. There's no explanation as to how it got there. Thomas explained that he found that story when he got the internet in 2000, but in 1995 he had his own experience during the winter months. He said, I remember driving through Clapham as the new bypass hadn't been built then, so I was on the A6. I would usually set off for home about 5:45 p.m. and remember it was a filthy night and it just kept on raining constantly. The roads were really slick like glass and my headlights were shining back at me. I was in a line of traffic doing about 15-20 miles an hour and there was a chap sitting completely naked on the curbside of the road, and he sat with his head in his knees with his arms wrapped around his knees. At the time I didn't stop. I didn't know about the story Jenny Randall shared until a few years later. But there was something really off about the whole situation. Now I see the connection, and I wonder if what happened to the man in Jenny's story had any connection to the man I saw that night in the rain. I raise this as it adds to the information on the area. So many strange things happen here. It's a place where 3 counties meet. In fact, the Tri-Border Stone is a short walk from the area, in the heart of this case. Thomas noticed a bright light connection between the case shared by Jenny Randalls and the man he saw. I mentioned that both men reminded me of the Zygmunt Adamski and his disappearance in Todmorden and his reappearance several weeks later. It was at this point in the chat that I told Thomas about my connection to Glassy Gleamer, who was Fred's friend and carer, but also a long-time researcher of the strange and unexplained. He lives in the Bedford area, and I've heard him mention so many of the places that Thomas mentioned. The creature he's seen on occasion he calls the 3 counties werewolf, and I don't believe in coincidences. Both men are researching the unexplained in the same area without knowing each other, and between them they have amassed a great deal of information. Which brings us back to the case which prompted Thomas to contact me and other members of the paranormal community. And now, knowing the details, it's a very worrying case indeed of a man who goes missing only to be found dead in unusual circumstances, and it seems that the incident's been covered up. We've heard this before, haven't we? It centres on a local man, and this man was a beater at one of the shoots in the area. Now, the man was in his 60s, and he was employed just for that day. And the shoot took place between 2 and 3, as Thomas explained. They'd done one last drive, and one of the birds was outstanding. So the beater, without his gun, with his dog, went in to find it. And that should have been a really quick thing, because the dog's trained to do that. And he just didn't come back. When another one of the guys went back in there, the pen that's normally closed was left open. By 8 o'clock, the police were stationed outside the wood, along with some members of the shoot, because they were asked to stay behind. The Facebook post went up by his family that night, but it was taken down again quite quickly. And then he was found around about 11 a.m. the following day, which would have been the Sunday. Paramedics were in attendance in the field alongside Springwood. Now, the man, we don't know if he was found deceased at that spot or later on, we're not sure. And no official statement has been made. And despite 3 Freedom of Information requests by Deborah, he said, I can still not gain any details on that case. I've tried 3 times to get information on this case, and I'm going to keep trying until I get some information in this case. Or, the other question I asked them was, reports of black cats seen in that area, or large cats seen in that area, around a certain amount of time, and I'll go into that later. Thomas went on to add, one local man stated that there were upwards of 30 officers out that night, and the man was found in an area that could have been easily searched, meaning he was out there all night and until the next day before he was found, and they didn't go in and look for him. The woodland is very small, so he and I have no idea how it's even possible to go missing in there. Other than the police presence, you wouldn't have known anything was happening. Thomas said the police did a house-to-house check to see if anyone had seen him, but nobody had, and nobody knows what happened to his dog. The man who was head of the shoot had made a report some months earlier after he came face to face with a large black cat. The wood in question is stocked for shoots, and there's a large pen where the birds are raised, and it's an area used by people for that reason. He said on that day he saw a cat and it was in the brambles. They looked at each other and he held himself together and walked past it. So we know a large cat has been seen in that area. In fact, there are several reports in all of the counties of large black cats not native to the UK, and sightings are increasing, as we know. Thomas explained that in the past, as he lived in a very rural area, there have been occasions when he spotted Apache helicopters in the field close to his home. Often they're just hovering there. And that's the area where he found the strange prints in the mud, only 3 weeks after the incident of the missing man at Springwood. The prints are pretty big, and they are no big dogs up where Thomas lives. It happened between 5-6 a.m. It had rained earlier the night, and then there'd been a hard frost. So Thomas believes the prints were made in the wet mud, and then they'd frozen over later. So there may be some distortion due to the weather conditions. The odd thing that stands out is that there were no claw marks on any of the prints. I had a look at my files, and I realised there's an area just north of Springwood, and there's a report from a family who had a harrowing encounter with a large cat. That was in 2019, so not that long ago. Their family dog was attacked, and the lady's name was Kaylee Holmes. She was 31, and with her husband Adam, who was 39, they'd been out walking their Rottweiler cross called Loki. when they came to face with the big cat. Now, Loki was only one, and she ran off into the woodland growling before emerging from the bushes with a bloody claw mark between her eyes. Adam, a manufacturing engineer, then went to investigate and was left frozen to the spot when he saw the panther-like creature lurking in Wakeley Wood. The couple quickly rushed their pet cat to the car and drove back to their home in Collie Weston, Northants, to report the incident to the police. They discovered Loki had also suffered cuts resembling lacerations to his front legs, so they took him to the emergency vets and the following day to treat the wounds. Mum of three Kaylee said, "What we saw was about 2 or 3 times bigger than my dog, and it was all black in colour. It was scruffy looking and had yellow eyes. Loki, my dog, comes up to my knees, weighs 41 kilo. He's not a small dog. This thing was massive. It was massive compared to him, and I don't know what else it could have been. We noticed that he was growling at the woodline before running in there, and then he quickly came back with his scratch mark between his eyes. So my husband Adam went into the woods, and that's when he saw it. It was at the bottom of a hill. It looked right at my husband, and then it just sloped off into the undergrowth. I think he was just frozen at the time. It was about 20 metres away, but he says it felt much closer than that. We got out of there as fast as we could. When we got home, we found Loki had injuries to his back legs, as well as the cuts to his face. And you can see no domestic cat could cause that much damage. I contacted the police and I was told that there had been other similar reports made by other people in the area. Kaylee said, "I've warned people on social media, but a lot of people are saying that we're making it up. I can totally assure them that we're not." A spokeswoman for Northamptonshire Police said to the Daily Star Online that the dog walker said the beast was bigger than their dog. On the 25th of November 2021, I was contacted by a listener from the Chesterton area who explained what happened to them on a dog walk and asked, "I don't know if it was a dog, a deer or a man. It kept looking at me dog." So the witness said, "Right, I've got something I've got to get off my chest. I didn't want to say this last night because it's Halloween and I didn't want to scare anybody's kids. But the other night, I went to the garage with my dog and saw the weirdest, most strangest animal, dog looking human thing, all mixed up with a deer and a fox. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I said to a young lad who was walking down where I saw it, I said, 'Oh, watch out, boy. There's something weird near you. Look down there.' And he said, 'Oh, yeah, it's them lemurs.' So if you're walking around Chesterton late at night, just keep an eye out," she said. In December 2005, one local man made a report to the BBC when he saw a strange creature near Rushden, and he said it was something sandy brown, possibly a jungle cat, about as big as a border collie, with distinctive markings on its tail and its lower back. The animal peered at me before casually disappearing into the undergrowth. All of these reports made me interested to have a look and see what other cases were around the three counties boundary. And I realised Thomas had spoke about Ministry of Defence land and it around in pockets in all of the areas. Well, RAF Alconbury and the reports of the hard stand monster would fall into that. Now that's often called a standing wolf, and it was seen on the base by several serving personnel. In the 1970s, a group of 3 men, along with their dogs, were guarding the bunkers within a large fenced-off area. A radio call went out informing the men that there was an intruder within the perimeter and that shots had been fired. The head guard could make out a figure in the fog, and as he approached it, it screamed in his face, and he described it as a man-like bipedal creature that bounded the fence to the north of the base. The man described the creature as hairy, standing approximately 5'9" in height, and it had intelligent, human-like eyes, a flat nose, and large ears. The teeth were large, but not fanged. The face was narrow around the eyes. but the head flared out again at the top. It had a very muscular, frog-like thighs, and he believes, but he's not certain, that it had reverse articulated legs like a horse. There was a mechanic on the base who was carrying out some routine work to an F-5 aircraft, and it was parked on the runway, and he went missing whilst doing a job that should have been completed in an hour. When he failed to make the telephone call checking in, or requesting a lift back from the hangar, a search went out to find him. They found him sitting in the aircraft, as white as a sheet, with the canopy closed. And although they asked him many times what it was that he'd seen, he refused to go into great detail, for fear he'd see it again. But he described a terrifying, hairy humanoid which had walked past the aircraft. Wesley Updegrove, who also saw the humanoid creature, said he tried to pursue it in an army truck as it escaped, heading north of the base. He described it as being 5'9" tall, with human-like eyes, a flat nose, and large ears. Sergeant Lee and Sergeant Jackson had a terrifying experience one night while on patrol with their 2 dogs. They saw some movement near the towers and called the main gate to check if any workmen were still on site. As they approached the tower, they came back, face to face with the airy figure. The dogs stopped in their tracks, absolutely terrified, frantically trying to get away. The truck arrived just in time to see the creature, whatever it was, climbing over the security fence, where it was last seen, entering the North Woods. Another man, who was in his 20s, 20-year-old at the time, was stationed at RAF Alconbury, and he saw the creature too, when it was in a secure weapons storage area. It seemed shocked and surprised to have been caught off guard, and the man who saw it froze in total fright. He was armed with a .38, never considered using it. There was no aggression on its part. It wasn't human. He said it had a flat snout and large eyes. Its height was approximately 5 feet and weighed around 200 pounds. It was very muscular and thin. It wore no clothing and was only moderately hairy. It ran away on its hind legs and scurried over a chain link fence and ran deep into the dense wooded area next to the north end of the base. Thomas mentioned case with the witness Fred, who lives in a remote Bedfordshire farm, which has had, over the years, all manner of strange activity happen. When one member of Fred's family passed away at the farm in 2018, his carer, known as Glassy Gleamer, found strange dog-like prints in the mud below one of the windows at the farm. There were also bangs and slaps on the walls of the house. Something was making it into the garden, upsetting the dog, which eventually led to a very frightening encounter for the remaining resident, and was for me one of the hardest cases I've ever had. What I found hard was listening to a man in complete distress in what some would call the winter of his life. The emotion and fear I heard over the telephone coming from Fred touched me in a way that has stayed with me. Fred, who was a lovely soul, and he was confronted by the wolf-like creature as it was watching him through his front room window in the middle of the night. Its eyes fixed on Fred's, and it held his gaze. Fred described the creature in great detail and was very clear on what he saw. He also told me some very interesting things that have happened in his village many decades ago. It was said that there was a secret tunnel used by silent nuns that were never seen, and who only ever moved around in the dark, who would bury their babies in the grounds. Now, the main thing about the creature that Fred saw were its eyes. He said they held his gaze and was mesmerised by them. The creature rapped and tapped on the window pane with what was neither a hand or a paw, something in between, judging by the tracks left behind. It was tall, and by looking at the window, we could judge the height at around 7 foot. It had a longer muzzle than Fred's dog, or an Alsatian. He said it looked like the wolf in the Red Riding Hood film. It had canine teeth and they were visible and its top lip hung over them. The hair or coat, particularly under the jaw, was scraggly, a bit like an Irish wolfhound, and it was dark in colour, not black, dark grey, I think. Its eyes were higher and more forward-facing than a standard canine, and Fred felt that the creature was hard to look at. Its gaze made you want to look away from it. The eyes grew wider, with an expression. Fred said it looked like it for a split second it had been shocked or surprised that he'd seen it. The eyes were dark, with very little off-white at the outer edges. The ears on this thing weren't as high as a Doberman or an Alsatian, but they had a slight fold or turning over at the top of them. The eyes were the main focus of the encounter, which pinned Fred, when he got out of bed, onto his Zimmer frame and looked straight through the window at him. Fred's an experienced animal judge, and he's worked with animals his whole life. Lassie Gillimer, who was Fred's good friend and carer, had an encounter himself just before the Warrington roundabout. And when he saw a strange creature looking into the floodwaters of a field, that was after the River Ouse burst its banks during the spring of COVID. In fact, it took place on the 1st of February 2021. Glassy was on his way to work early that morning. He was so startled by what he saw, he waited until the end of his shift and went back in better light to see if it was mistaken. He was hoping to debunk what he saw that morning, but the return visit did not show anything that could have confused him as it being the figure that he'd seen earlier that day. Lassie said, "I was driving to work. I was moving along the route. I could see the river, and I kept getting glimpses of something in the water in a flooded field. This thing came from behind a hedgerow in the second field and was wading through there, and it had very long hair. Even at the cuff area of the arms, it was easy to see this had long hair, and you could see the shape of it as it moved. It wasn't human. It reminded me of the typical description of an early woodwose. The hair went over its hands and hung down. It was a charcoal grey colour, and it was silhouetted against the water. Looking at it now, and back here, I can see there's nothing I could have mistaken it for. It wasn't standing still to not be seen, so I could not have possibly confused, a telephone pole or a tree for this thing. It was a living thing, and it was wading through the water, and I could see it clearly. And there's nothing that big out here, and it was big. It came through the water, looking down every now and again. I saw it put its hand over the water as it was looking down, looking for something. I slowed right down this morning to about 35 miles an hour, and there were no other vehicles around that early, so there were no cars in front of me or behind me. I got a really good clear look at it. I formed the impression it was fishing. You could see the long hair on its face as it leant forward to look into the water. It was thick-bodied thing. It must have been at least 8 feet tall, and was standing here. Now I think about it, it might have been even taller. He was also really thick and bulky. Now at this point, I should point out that neither Thomas or myself are saying that all of these incidents are connected. What we're saying is, in certain parts of the UK, there are areas of high strangeness, and this tri-county area seems to be one of those. So between the sightings of large cats, numerous wolf-like creatures, several wolf sightings, the area, indeed, is one of mystery. It has all the things we look for in areas of high strangeness: lots of ley lines, county borders, nature reserves and old Ministry of Defence land, golf courses, and many are close to operating military bases. Now, the UFO reports in this area continue to come in, along with so many large cat reports, that I'm leaning towards Thomas' advice that we really are not that safe in the countryside, and we could be shadowed, stalked, and followed without ever knowing it. The man who went missing was an avid outdoorsman. He was in a wood he knew well, with a dog that he trusted. What happened to him? And why was the woodland not searched by the police? In fact, it was cordoned off with officers, so no search could take place. Why was there no mention of this case in the local press or even the national papers? The man went missing and was found in unusual circumstances, yet there is no trace of any that I can find online. He was not the only man to go missing and be found in unusual circumstances in the area, though. One case happened earlier this month, around the time that Thomas first contacted me. On the 8th of April 2025, police called off a search after a man was found deceased in mysterious circumstances after being missing for several weeks. His bike was found a number of miles from his body. The man's name was Kyle, and that's the only name he's given. And he went missing from his hometown of Reading on March the 26th, and was then last sighted on the same day in Mare Fair, walking towards St Peter's Way, Northampton. The 36-year-old's motorcycle was later recovered by police, parked up in a car park on the junction of Marlborough and Byfield Road. However, nearly 3 weeks on from when he was last seen, the search was sadly called off after a member of the public contacted Northamptonshire police to report that they had found a man's body in woodland near the A428. Detective Inspector Stuart Streeter said, "Sadly, a man's body has been found this weekend. A coronial investigation will be carried out. However, it is apparent that there does not appear to be any suspicious circumstances surrounding this death." Earlier last year, the same thing happened in the Stonic Lake area. On the 1st of August 2024, a body discovered in water at a country park had been identified as a man who went missing on the 28th of April. Jamie Atwood, who was 37 and from Round in Northamptonshire, was found dead at around 6 p.m. Searches involving the National Police Air Service had been underway in the area. Northamptonshire Police have asked for the public's help in piecing together what happened to Mr. Atwood after the last confirmed sighting of him. Now, a police investigation was launched after Mr. Atwood's family reported him missing from his home, which is just a short trek to the area where the beater went missing after the shoot. It'd been established that he'd been seen 5 miles away in Earthlingborough on the afternoon of the 27th of July. Now, it's not clear where he was between that sighting on the Saturday and the discovery of his body on Wednesday. The case is close to the area of Rushden, where a man saw a ginormous jungle-like cat, and that was seen in 2006. Now, Thomas has asked me if I could make a Freedom of Information request for the area as a whole, the case of the missing beater, and for any large cat sightings reported to the authorities in the 3 counties, and that's what I've done. I'm currently trawling local newspaper archives, community group posts, several Facebook groups in the hopes of finding out any information that could possibly be available. Well, maybe you could help with that. Do you have any information on strange activity in the areas mentioned tonight? Have you seen a large cat or other animal that was hard to identify that would fit the description of the beast of Brigstock? Or do you have information about cases that fall into the Warrington Triangle or the 3 counties werewolf cases? I'm starting to believe my Freedom of Information requests are being censored because, as far as I'm aware, you always receive, and I have done in the past, a confirmation email notification after submitting an FOI request, and that has not happened in this case. The request should be then answered within 20 working days. So today, I've applied again. Do you have information on Ministry of Defence land, known or unknown, for the areas I've mentioned tonight? Now, I will be chatting with Thomas again, and I have done in between our first conversation and me making this today, and I will bring you an update on this case. as they come in. And I'm going to sit down with Thomas as well, because he feels it was a very early incident in his life where he feels like something's attached to him, and it has come almost close to his home, if you get what I mean, and almost like the hitchhiker effect kind of thing. But I'll explain more in a later podcast. Now, next week, you'll hear from listeners who have seen werewolves here in the UK, and I'll share a case with you from Leeds in Yorkshire that we're calling the Wortley Werewolf. So make sure you tune in for that one on the same day, in the same time, next week. Good night, everyone.